there guys, and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy VI, which is a game that I had attempted to play sometime in the last 5 years. I'm not exactly sure when I started to play it the first time, but needless to say, I didn't finish it. I made it approximately halfway through. I got through the iconic opera scene and got the first airship. I recruited Setzer, and for some reason at that point I stopped playing and put the game down. As of a couple days ago, I finally made the push and I decided to just go ahead and finish. Final Fantasy VI was originally released in 1994 for the SNES, and it was called Final Fantasy III in America. The version that I have is the first re-release of the game. It was for the PlayStation 1, and it was given the proper title Final Fantasy VI. The game was ported to PlayStation along with FF5 as Final Fantasy Anthology in 1999, and I've had that version of the game sitting around for probably 10 or more years and just have never gotten around to it. The PlayStation port is the direct port of the SNES version, so all of the menus are still the same and the translation is really bad. And for instance, the Great Marlborough enemy is called an Evil Oscar for like some reason that I don't know. That must have been a translation thing that they made later on. But all of the spell and the item names are really outdated. They weren't updated and modernized to the traditional Final Fantasy naming system that we have nowadays. So, you know, using a tonic instead of an ether was kind of a weird thing, and using Fire 3 instead of Farago was, you know, kind of annoying, and, you know, it's just how it was back in the day. With that, I have a couple of different things that I want to talk about, and we'll start with graphics, because even though this game is, like more than 20 years old now, the sprite artwork is just, like, fantastic. You know, I just love the sprites, and the background is really well done, and, you know, this is the way the game should look. It's not the, like, ridiculous repackaging and remaster, I guess, that they did with the Steam and the iOS ports of the game. It's stunning to look at. The only sort of problem that I really had with the graphics is that, well, yeah, I mean, it's all completely in 2D, and that in itself is not a problem, but when you go to use a vehicle like the Chocobo or either of the airships, the problem is that you're trying to fly or ride the Chocobo in a 3D plane, but the game is built in 2D, and the way it works is it's just really not that good. And so I consistently had problems of, like, overshooting the place I was trying to go to, or the town that I was trying to find. And on one hand, like, I just had problems just trying to find the towns I wanted, because you can't access a full world map like you can in Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9. And so, like, you had to physically remember where all of the towns were, and then, of course, as everybody knows, in the second half of the game, the entire layout of the world changes, and you're left with having to relearn the entire world map, because things that were in the upper right corner are now in the bottom right corner, or something like that, or things that were underwater are now above water. And so that was kind of, you know, one of those challenges that games posed back in the day that they don't now. They make things much more linearly now, or they at least tell you where you're supposed to go. And in Final Fantasy VI, they don't do that. In terms of the music and the sound, I am really invested in the overall sound production and quality of specifically Final Fantasy games. I mean, it's always something I pay attention to in everything that I play, but in Final Fantasy, I think that they do have some of the best music and orchestration and sound design in just about all of video games, particularly RPGs, as that's primarily what I play. But I mean, this is me going on record and saying that I think that this is probably the best overall score for a Final Fantasy game. I mean, every new area you visit, and I know I played half of the game before, and so I already knew some of the themes and stuff, and I already loved them, but it's always a treat walking into a new town or a new dungeon or anything, and just to hear the music, and it's just phenomenal. Like, I can't believe how good it is, and I know this is me just gushing and not really saying anything definitive, but I think Uematsu really outdid himself with this one, and it's probably his best work overall. I mean, all of the character themes are absolutely phenomenal, and during the credits scenes, they loop everybody's themes together, and it's just beautiful the way that they can all create one medley together. It's just so good. In terms of like integrity, though, I did have some weird graphical and sound hiccups while I was playing. Like, I would be on the battle screen, but then like sound would stop entirely. It's supposed to be a sound effect of when your character is hitting the enemy, but I wasn't getting anything. And then there were other times little squiggly lines would cover up the numbers that I should be seeing, so I wasn't sure what kind of damage I was doing to the enemies. Nothing game-breaking by any means, but still kind of weird, and glitches happen. I actually don't know that this is a particularly strong story for the Final Fantasy series. I know that's gonna probably get me a lot of hate, but bear with me. I mean, I think that generally, like, the storyline is pretty simple. That's not to say bad, but it just didn't really engage me in the same ways as some of the later narratives did, and I think that might be part of why I put the game down the first time. I was like, I got to that opera scene, which I have read about extensively on the internet. I mean, everybody has some, really inflated opinion of it. And then I got there and I was like, this is it? When you see that scene in context and then really reflect on what everybody's going through, the thing with this game is it has this immense ensemble cast, and I think that's part of why the story and some of the presentation kind of fell flat for me, is because by the end of the game, if you recruit the two optional characters, there are 14 playable characters in the game, and all of the characters you pick up in like the first couple of hours of the game were all of my favorite characters. Terra, Locke, Celeste, Sabine, Edgar. Like, those 5 were the 5 that I really cared about and loved the stories of, and just thought were incredible, nuanced characters. Like, the characters that join you slightly later, Cyan, Setzer, Gao. I love the characters, but I don't think that they contributed as much overall to the story. I mean, I guess Mog saves you sort of in the beginning of the game, but like Umaro and Gogo are like 2 completely optional characters, and Umaro I could have given or taken. I never actually used him ever, but Gogo I thought was fantastic, and I loved using him or her or whatever. I think that having so many characters kind of really brings this game down, and I really do want to identify with a main hero character, like one sole protagonist, of which this game doesn't have. Terra is technically like your first half lead, and then Celeste is like your second half lead, and they were definitely my 2 favorite characters. The game is not based on that. It's more about first taking down Gestalt, and then after that it's about taking down Kefka and saving the world that has been ruined. Story-wise, good, not great. I think it's a decently sized game. I actually took a recording of how many hours I had put into it. I actually started recording a timer after I went into the final battle just to see what my final time would be, and I came in just under 55 hours. That's pretty significant. I didn't even do everything. I did like 95% of the content in the game. The one thing that I kind of just couldn't get into was the Dragon's Neck Coliseum, and I really wanted to, but it was just kind of frustrating. If I didn't read a guide, then I would pretty much instantly die because I wouldn't have protection against a status effect or an element, and so like when you bet an item in the Coliseum, you lose it, so then you have to reset the game, and the load times are pretty slow, so you'd have to reset and then do it over and then open the guide and then, you know, go from there and repeat it. So I only did the Coliseum for a couple of key things that I thought I should get, but I that was one thing that I would have loved to see more of. Like, I didn't even do the Siegfried fight because there wasn't anything for me to gain there. When it came to just the difficulty of the game, you know, battle-wise, I didn't really have too many issues. Like, I will admit this, I famously, like, lost to the first boss fight because I forgot how it worked, and so, like, if you attack this snail thing at a certain time, it pretty much one-hit KOs you, and so I died against it, I think, twice, which is, like, absolutely ridiculous for the first boss, but it kind of tells you that that's going to be a mechanic in the game, and so, like, when that became apparent, I kind of had some trouble with some boss fights in the early game, but once you get to the mid and late game and you just have all of your espers, you pretty much can just stockpile all your characters and they're all fine, and once you get some good equipment, then it's no problem at all to get through the fights. I did, like, for some reason have a lot of trouble in the early game, but once we got past that point, it wasn't a big deal. One issue, and this is just something that exists for me for all games before a certain date, pretty much, before a certain console generation, is that the first half of the game does a really good job of holding your hand and telling you exactly where to go, but in the second half, your party is completely scattered, and at that point, like, if I didn't use a guide, I would have honestly never found somebody like Locke, who's, like, locked away in this long dungeon. There's, like, 2 hints in the game, and they're both extremely vague, and, like, I looked at both of them, and, you know, unless I was really dedicated to trying it the hard way, like, it would have taken me hours just to find him, and even then, if I got there, I wouldn't know what to do when I got to the Phoenix Cave, so, like, that's something that kind of really sticks with me, and, like, the game gives you hints, but I don't think, me, from a modern gaming perspective, I don't think that I would have ever solved them without the use of a guide, and so even if I had played this back in the day, like, I would have been on the boards and, like, asking for help all the time, because I don't think I would have been able to solve it on my own. Like, that's not necessarily a check against the game, but it's something that you don't really have to think about much anymore, because a lot of games are so linear and they tell you exactly where to go, and they have built-in hints, and, you know, this is something that games didn't have back in 1994, so that was just something that stuck out to me, is I probably wouldn't have found all of my party members if I lived in a completely, you know, disconnected world where I couldn't access a guide. I would have probably had to buy the strategy guide, I guess. So, there's that. So then the final thing is just kind of my general impressions or comments about the game, and, you know, I played it over the course of a couple months. I'm not sure when I picked it up. It was probably October-ish last year, and so it took me like 4 months to beat it, and I think part of it has to do with the thin plot and guidance that you get in the second half of the game, where it just kind of you're plopped in the world all alone, and then the game doesn't tell you what to do, so you just have to explore, and like that's okay. But then the story just kind of goes like completely by the wayside. So like everything we built up to in the first half, we just kind of put a hold on the plot. So like by the time that I finally got to Kefka's tower, I had no fucking clue what was going on. So I just like was like, okay, we gotta fight these statues again. Like, I thought Kefka broke these, and so I didn't really know what was going on by the time that I finally got to the end. So, you know, things that I do like in games are when they give you summaries and stuff, but, you know, that's neither here nor there. Generally, though, like, I think that, you know, one opinion and impression that I did come away with is that I think that we should forget the idea of the Final Fantasy VII remake and put all of our resources into a Final Fantasy VI remake for a PlayStation 4. And, you know, this game might actually work if you made it in installments. You have the Terra path, and then you have the Locke path, and then you have the Sabine path that you have to take. And if we're using that as a criterion, then, like, that would definitely make sense to do a remake of this game. But I just think that there's so much potential here. You know, everything is in 16-bit, and you have MIDI soundtrack. I think that this game, these characters, would absolutely benefit from an HD, like a real HD remake, not the Steam remake. We've already seen Terra realized in 3D with the Dissidia games. Like, I don't see why we couldn't take that a step further and just go remake this game. And obviously, like, they would run into the same issues with wanting to add content, I'm sure. But, you know, Final Fantasy VI never had any sequels, so they really don't have too much extra content to draw on. Just my argument for the Final Fantasy VI remake. Overall, definitely, I really liked the game. I know it's a lot of people's favorite game, and I think that it would have left a better impression on me if I had played it. First, if I was younger, and then if I played it in its time when it was a huge revolution in terms of like what a game narrative and characters and world and story and music could be. And, you know, now playing it more than 20 years removed is kind of a weird experience. So it holds up. Like, it absolutely, you hear that all the time about old games, like, oh, they hold up. But sprite artwork doesn't, it's never gonna go out of style. I mean, clearly we're still seeing games being made with sprite artwork, so it does get my stamp of approval. It gets a recommendation. I would absolutely play it if you're a fan of JRPGs or if you're a Final Fantasy person. I'm glad that I finally finished it, but it hasn't really changed the way that I look at it. I still think that, like, oh, it's great, but it's definitely not my favorite, and you know, that's okay. It doesn't have to be. That's not what this is about. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and next video I can definitely tell you will be on Ocarina of Time, so please look forward to that. And stay tuned and have a good one, okay?